Our next speaker moving along is Martin Hahn. Mr. Hahn is a partner at Hogan Lovells, and as noted on their website, he uses his background in food technology and understanding of the laws governing the food industry to help clients navigate regulatory and business issues. He is also a Food Forum member. Mr. Hahn.
Thank you, Robin. Great to be here today. I couldn't help but notice Dr. Califf's comment that he's not a lawyer, but he did say somewhat positive about the lawyers' interactions he had at FDA. So certainly appreciate the positive call out. Great to be part of this program, and I thought it would be interesting to focus on. There we go. Focus on some of the challenges that the industry is going to be facing when they try to communicate some of the benefits. In terms of disclosures, no surprises here. I do represent the food industry. I am not, however, being paid to be part of this program. I'm honored to be part of the panel, and the comments that I'm saying today are my comments. And what I really want to talk about is how can we pivot once the science is established. And I think that I'm going to echo what every one of the other presenters have said today. We need to have better science. We have got to have the science, but once that science exists, how can we communicate that information into the public in a way that's going to be compliant with the current regulatory framework? And what are some of the challenges that we have in terms of where there could be improvement? And I'm actually going to support the fact that I think we need better regulation here as well, because of the fact that the current regulatory system isn't entirely designed to deal with some of the technology and some of the power this technology has to offer. So briefly, FDA regulates products based on intended use. Intended use is going to dictate whether a product is subject to regulation as a medical device. And Dr. Laurie did such a great job of talking about FDA's regulation of medical devices and where there's some lapses in that regulation with regard to lab developed test. It's also going to determine whether the product is going to be regulated as a drug or whether it's going to be a structure function claim, a nutrient content claim, or a health claim. Not going to spend a lot of time on this slide because it's been presented earlier, but the bottom line is a disease claim will subject your product to regulation as an unapproved new drug or a biologic. So if you make a claim that a product is going to be used in the diagnosis, cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease, that's a drug claim, and it is limited to products that are regulated by FDA as drugs or biologics. That definition has been in the statute since 1938, makes a great deal of sense. But as we start seeing these blurring lines between what are nutritional interventions that impact disease, it makes things a little bit complicated when you're trying to communicate in clear and unequivocal terms what is the benefit of a particular intervention. Health claims, qualified health claims, get outside the definition of drug because you're talking about reducing the risk of developing a disease. So while a drug claim talks about treating osteoporosis, if you're talking about reducing the risk of osteoporosis, that's a health claim or a qualified health claim. And then finally, structure function claims. Appreciate Dr. Califf's comment about I'm not quite certain what these are. Well, I spent a lot of time in this space, and I can tell you they are claims that you can make on foods and dietary supplements, but they have to be limited to the effect of that substance on the structure or function of the body. But I'm also going to recognize that there's a paradox when it comes to structure function claims. And echoing Dr. Califf's comments, I agree. I'm not always quite certain what a structure function claim is conveying. And that's somewhat problematic because we should, if we're communicating to our consumers, know what's being conveyed. But I'm going to have to admit that if I say calcium builds strong bones, that's a claim that FDA has recognized as an appropriate structure function claim for decades. But it probably is implying that product may reduce your risk of developing osteoporosis. Likewise, whole oats support heart health. It's well recognized that oats have a positive effect on your total cholesterol levels, as low as raising HDL, lowering LDL, having a much better improvement. But I suspect a lot of consumers are going to look at that claim and say, wait a second, I need to eat my oatmeal every day so I don't have a heart attack, even though that's not what's specifically being said. So there is this paradox because that structure function claim, while it's very tailored and unique, and of course has to be supported by competent, reliable scientific evidence, has the potential of conveying a message that may not have been intended. Now, here's an example of a health claim. And being in the food regulatory practice, One of my most frustrating experiences is dealing with that new marketer, probably in their mid-20s, who's fresh out of school and they're convinced. They will say quite insistently, this is not effective communication. There are too many syllables and too many characters. A consumer, if they can't read it in a half a second or less, it's going to be lost on them. I, of course, think, well, look, this is great. FDA approved this statement. How could this possibly not be helpful? But these marketers will say, no, this is the type of claim that's going to resonate well with consumers. Short, pithy, right to the point. So there is a tremendous tension, as you can imagine, trying to convey and find that language that's going to be effectively conveying the message to the consumers in a way that consumers are going to actually understand why that particular product may or may not be good for them. Now, the Federal Trade Commission, unlike FDA, they spend less time on those regulatory boxes. Their focus is whether the statements you're making are both truthful and not misleading. Health claims need to be supported by competent and reliable scientific evidence. And one of the things that the FTC does is they look and focus not only on those express claims, but they also focus on implied claims. And if you look at the case law and the precedent that's out there, if you make a statement and it implies to a particular individual, here an example is this cosmetic is age defying. If consumers look at that and say, oh, this is going to prevent wrinkles, but the studies don't show that it actually prevents wrinkles, that claim's misleading as somewhere between 15 to 20% of consumers are misled. So understanding these implied claims that are conveyed are really, really important, because that's a pretty small percentage of consumers that if they're misled, that claim is considered a false and misleading claim, which provides even further tension when you're trying to come up with these short and pithy structure function claims that so many of the marketers insist are much better at communicating the benefits. So how do we communicate the benefits of personalized or precision nutrition? I have been absolutely amazed at the presentations for the first 2 days. I see so much great research taking place, so many great opportunities, but also recognize that there is a lot of work that needs to be done. And one of the foundational elements when it comes to communicating about precision and personalized nutrition is it has to be truthful. It has to be based on the underlying science. And I think that we're close. I'm not certain that we're quite there yet. But as more research and more time and more resources are invested in this area, I'm optimistic that we're actually going to start cracking this nut and be successful in being able to tailor specific diets to specific people who present a particular issue, whether it be based on their genetic sequencing, whether it be based on their risk factors, whether it be based on their socioeconomic conditions. But I do see a lot of value. So the question here is, how do we communicate this information? So I thought it would be kind of interesting to just pull some of the examples, some of the research that is available today and see how the current system works, and quite frankly, how the current system doesn't work. Let's look at taking your genetic sequencing to identify foods that will help you respond more appropriately to certain type of diets. One of the researchers were talking about how there are certain people with a certain allele on their DNA that are going to respond more favorably to high protein diets than others. Well, if that proves to be true and it withstands the double-blind placebo-controlled study, and we actually are able to identify that there are these people with this particular allele that are going to be more responsive to high protein diets, that's a type of structure function claim that you can certainly make. You can say, yes, if you present this particular DNA profile, you should be on a high protein diet because it can help you lose weight. Claim that's a structure function claim that, quite frankly, also is one that would have to be supported by competent, reliable scientific evidence and can be communicated effectively. What if you're looking at, and that's Dr. I think it was Johnson's presentation on the gut microbiome. Quite frankly, I wanted to have her take pictures of my diet and my gut microbiome because those were just the most beautiful photographs I've ever seen, which means I completely geeked out. But I just thought that was such an amazing presentation. But here's another case where if you want to talk about how this particular intervention, whether it be a particular type of fiber, whether it be a particular type of diet, is going to have a particular impact on your gut microbiome, that's also a structure function claim that can be communicated effectively. What if you were going to look at the DNA and genetic analysis to determine what type of foods that are more beneficial for you? This one research was talking about how for some people, spinach is actually a great food, but for other people, they can't process the oxalic acid in spinach, and so therefore that's a food they need to avoid. Again, that would be tailored nutrition based on somebody's genetic analysis that you could communicate in an effective way, because you're talking about, hey, based on your underlying DNA, you probably should be avoiding spinach, but here are some other foods that you should be integrating into your diet. But where things start getting a little more complicated is when we're moving away from the healthy population. What if you have a product that, and one of the researchers was talking about how they had done all this research with people with type 2 diabetes, and they were actually able to identify specific diets that were very effective in terms of helping them reduce the risk of developing diabetes, or if you had type 2 diabetes, could actually reduce their insulin dependence. That becomes a much more complicating message to communicate. If it turns out that you are able to show that a particular intervention is going to reduce the risk of developing a disease, that would be something that you could go to FDA and get a health claim. But what if you're talking about giving people with type 2 diabetes a particular intervention that would be subject to regulation as a disease claim, something that would require FDA approval as a drug, or to make a structure function claim that FDA considers to be appropriate would be support blood glucose levels within the normal range? Well, that certainly is not helpful in terms of communicating the benefits of this technology. And you can certainly understand why that's not going to be an effective means of communication. And what also, if it turns out in the future, again, these are all hypothetical situations where we're seeing promising research. Well, what happens if a particular alteration in the gut microbiome actually is shown that it can be effective in fighting the length and severity of the common cold? That would be a great intervention that certainly could be quite helpful. But length and severity of the common cold is a disease claim that subjects that product to regulation as a drug. And if you're going to simply say, oh, you should take this particular intervention because it's going to support the immune system, you're under promising and over delivering and not communicating in a clear and effective manner. So there are challenges in terms of how we can start communicating this information to consumers when we have a situation where the data are actually there. And one of the questions I think that really has to be addressed is it appropriate to subject these products to the new drug approval process, something that, according to pharmaceutical industry publications, can take hundreds of millions, if not over $1 billion to seek approval? That certainly is not going to be what I would consider a viable option for much of this technology. I agree with Dr. Lurie that when it comes to medical devices, if we have an app that is specifically talking about helping you manage a disease, yes, I agree FDA should be regulating those as medical devices. So medical device and drug regulation are appropriate, but if we're going to subject all these products through the drug regulatory approval process, it's really going to be stifling innovation. And one of the things that I would love to have is a discussion with all the stakeholders, and that's why I'm so proud to be part of the Food Forum, is because we could actually look at what are solutions. This technology is evolving. It's moved beyond its infancy. It's actually out there today. Should we be looking at whether there's new legislation that we have to give FDA authority to try to figure out how to deal with the appropriate regulatory structure for precision or precision nutrition or personalized medicine? Could we look at existing authority? Foods for special dietary use. The statute's recognized since 1938 that there are special dietary use foods that are designed to for which you can design a food that's going to meet the unique nutritional requirements that may exist for diseases, pregnancy, overweight, underweight, food allergies. That may provide FDA with a current legal framework if they wanted to establish a framework where these products could actually have some type of regulatory oversight. And I agree, regulatory oversight would be beneficial here. And the other thing we can do is just let this technology continue to advance. We could adopt the Uber model. The Uber model is basically, we'll build it, we'll break it, and then we'll deal with the regulatory consequences afterwards. I quite frankly am not a huge fan of that approach. I think that we have so much potential here. And what I'd really like to see is a dialogue with all the stakeholders to figure out how we can make certain that we have a regulatory structure in place that's going to allow this technology to move into the next phase and actually be able to be utilized in a way where you're able to communicate the benefits of the technology to your targeted population. That's all I have. I really appreciate being part of the panel, and I'll turn it back to you, Robin.
Great. Thank you so much, Martin.